Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In Manhattan, life unfolds like a film in fast forward. Skyscrapers cast their shadows across the bustling streets, where car horns blare like a cacophony of modernity. Amid this hustle and bustle, Alexander Harper, a 38-year-old billionaire, cruises the avenues in his black limousine, surrounded by the opulence and comfort that only colossal wealth can provide. He has it all: businesses, villas, yachts, and even the respect, or fear, of his peers. Yet, despite his success, Alexander seems strangely empty. The smiles he receives are often self-serving, and every admiring gesture around him leaves a bitter taste. One day, hurrying to a crucial business dinner, he spotted an old man sitting on a crumpled piece of cardboard on a street corner. The beggar, with stained clothes and graying hair, held a small box close to him like a treasure. His eyes, despite his weariness and poverty, seemed to pierce the souls of passers-by. Alexander, used to ignoring the world around him, walks past him without a glance. But the old man calls to him in a frail but firm voice. "Don't eat that." Alexander laughed inwardly. A foreign voice, advice from a stranger, it was worthless. Yet something in its strange, almost urgent tone held his attention. He continued, smiling disdainfully. "I have no time for your warnings, old man. Eat your dry bread and let me move on." But the old man insists, raising a trembling hand. "You don't know what it is, but if you eat it, everything will change. For the worse." A shiver runs through Alexander. An inexplicable intuition takes hold of him. But in his world of power and money, instinct is often relegated to the background behind logic and ego. He looks away, convinced that he's just another madman. Yet this single moment, this ignored piece of advice, will be the catalyst for events that no amount of wealth, control, or influence can prevent. The truth, invisible to the naked eye, is waiting to be revealed, and when Alexander sees it, what he thought was a simple warning will change his life forever. Alexander Harper entered the glittering lobby of his building, a skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan, where the white marble reflected the sun like a dazzling mirror. Every detail, from the crystal chandelier to the meticulously arranged Persian rugs, seemed to proclaim his success, and he, in a perfectly tailored suit, walked with the confidence that only wealth can provide. Despite his luxurious surroundings, a slight irritation persisted. The beggar's advice still echoed in his mind, "Don't eat that." He shook his head. He'd received warnings like these his whole life, from overly cautious financial advisors, anxious partners, and even distant relatives. But none of them had ever managed to stop Alexander Harper. He had built his empire on risk-taking, and every warning he ignored seemed to reinforce his belief that he was invincible. Yet, this old man in the street was not like the others. His gaze, deep and penetrating, seemed to hold a knowledge that money could not buy. Alexander shuddered, a mixture of contempt and curiosity taking hold of him. A few hours later, at the business dinner he was hosting, Alexander found himself facing his partners. The table was meticulously set, silver cutlery, sparkling wine glasses, and sophisticated dishes with unpronounceable names. The tantalizing aroma of the dishes prepared by the billionaire's personal chef wafted through the air. Without thinking, he took a bite of the main course. A strange, slightly bitter taste immediately caught his attention. He frowned and murmured, "This taste, it's not normal." His companions laughed, thinking he was exaggerating to sound dramatic. But for Alexander, every sense seemed on high alert. The beggar's voice suddenly echoed in his mind, "Don't eat that." He jumped up, leaving behind the astonished looks. He took out his phone and tried to call the old man, but he didn't know his name or his number. All he had was that face, those piercing eyes. As he walked down the street, a strange sensation came over him, his heart beat faster, his hands trembled slightly. The world around him seemed blurry, as if an invisible veil had just fallen over reality. And there, at the corner of the street, he saw him again. The beggar was holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. Alexander, against his will, approached. You You were serious, weren't you? Asked Alexander, a hint of concern in his voice. The old man looked at him, his eyes sad but determined. You don't know what you're holding in your hands. If you've already tasted it, it might be too late. But there's still a chance, if you listen and understand. Alexander felt his arrogance waver. For the first time in years, he understood that there was something that neither his money, nor his power, nor his intelligence could control. The beggar silently held out the package to him. Alexander hesitated, and it was at that precise moment that his world would change forever. Alexander Harper remained motionless for a few moments, staring at the small package the beggar still held. His instinct urged him to step back, to throw away this mysterious object, but his curiosity, that fatal flaw of all-powerful men, prevailed. He took a deep breath and slowly unwrapped the brown paper. Inside, a strange fruit rested on a carefully folded leaf. Its color was deceptively innocent, an almost golden yellow, but a thin red vein ran through its skin, as if the fruit itself had been marked with a silent warning. Alexander frowned. He had never seen anything like it in his travels around the world. What is it? He asked, trying to mask the concern in his voice. That's what you've already tasted without knowing, replied the beggar, his eyes piercing Alexander's soul. If you have chewed this fruit, your life will never be the same again. Every decision, every choice you make will be different. For better or for worse. Alexander burst into nervous laughter, shaking his head. Stop with your riddles. I'm a businessman, not a superstitious child. But the beggar didn't flinch. He looked at him with a gravity that made Alexander shudder. You don't yet know what you hold in your hands, and what you've tasted. The truth will come to you, whether you're ready or not. Alexander, skeptical but worried, put the fruit in his pocket. He wanted to believe it was just an old man's superstition, but deep down, a strange feeling was growing, a fear he had never felt despite all the financial crises and threats to his empire. A few hours later, as he returned to his office, he felt an intense unease. His vision blurred at times, and his mind seemed to see shadows behind every door, familiar but strangely distorted faces. Every interaction with his assistants and partners now seemed tainted by lies, duplicity, or hidden truths. What's happening to me? He murmured to himself. Then, his phone vibrated. An unknown message, with no number displayed. You have tasted the truth. Soon, it will catch up with you. Alexander felt his heart stop for a moment. The anonymous messages, the cryptic warnings, he realized this was no longer just a beggar's plea, but a prelude to something much bigger. And from that moment on, he knew that every decision he made would be watched, judged, and could have consequences that no amount of wealth could erase. Fear, anxiety, and curiosity mingled within him. And in a corner of his mind, a persistent thought echoed, I need to understand. Before it's too late. The days that followed were strangely silent in Alexander Harper's vast office. The usual bustle of his empire seemed to recede, as if time itself hesitated to continue its course. Yet Alexander felt a growing unease, a dull tension that refused to leave him. It had all started with small things, a file that mysteriously disappeared, emails he had never sent appearing in his inbox, decisions he thought he had made, altered by an invisible force. Every meeting, every call, every contract seemed to follow a logic he didn't understand. Something's wrong. He murmured, rubbing his temples in front of his computer. That day, he encountered a situation that would change his perception of reality. In his office, Emily Johnson, one of his loyal assistants of 10 years, entered with an important file. Her hands were trembling slightly, and her gaze was worried. Mr. Harper. I think there's a mistake in the last contract. The figures, they don't add up. Alexander frowned. How long had she been working for him without ever making a mistake? And yet, when he checked, the figures were indeed incorrect. But what frightened him even more was a detail. Some figures seemed to reflect not financial reality, but his own past choices, decisions he had never made, but which he had somehow tasted through this fruit. A new fear gripped him. It was no longer a matter of superstition. the beggar's truth was catching up with him. Every action he thought he controlled was now influenced by a force he didn't understand. The fruit, the package, it wasn't just a warning, it was a trigger. "I must find that old man," Alexander murmured, his voice trembling. He went out into the streets of Manhattan, his gaze fixed on every face. But the beggar had vanished. As if he had been nothing more than a shadow, a fleeting warning. Yet the sensation of his gaze, that almost supernatural intensity, followed him everywhere. And as he walked through a narrow alley, he saw a hastily written note on the wall. "The truth is watching you. Every choice is a trap." Alexander felt an icy chill run down his spine. He understood that what he had tasted was not an ordinary fruit, but a key to a reality that no amount of wealth could buy or control. At that precise moment, he knew that his life, as he knew it, was over. And that every decision he made from now on could bring him closer to the truth, or plunge him into an abyss from which he would never emerge. The effects of the strange fruit and the beggar's warnings were now being felt in every corner of Alexander Harper's life. That morning, he awoke with a start, breathless, unable to distinguish his dreams from reality. The walls of his luxurious suite seemed to close in on him, and every mirror reflected not his familiar face, but an altered, aged, and weary version, marked by fear. At the office, things took a more concrete and disturbing turn. His employees, usually dedicated and efficient, seemed to be acting strangely. Emily Johnson, his loyal assistant, stood before him, pale, as if she saw something he himself could not perceive. "Mr. Harper," she began hesitantly, "your appointments, your decisions, they no longer correspond to what you planned." Alexander felt his heart race. Contracts, acquisitions, even the smallest, most mundane decisions were now distorted, altered by this invisible force unleashed by the fruit he had tasted. Every step he took in his empire seemed to drag him toward a chaos he couldn't comprehend. Then came the first public confrontation. At a meeting with international investors, Alexander presented figures and strategies that seemed correct in his mind, but which, on screen and in the documents, were completely distorted. The investors, perplexed and irritated, exchanged worried glances. Some whispered doubts about his competence. "What's going on?" thought Alexander, sweat beading on his forehead. But the worst was yet to come. As he was leaving the meeting, an anonymous message appeared on his phone. "You are no longer in control. Every choice is now your truth, or your downfall." At that moment, Alexander finally understood that the beggar had spoken the truth. The fruit wasn't simply a warning, it was a trigger. He had just tasted a higher truth, a perception of the world and the consequences of every action he should never have touched. Every decision he made from now on would be observed, amplified, and distorted by a force he couldn't comprehend. Fear gripped him deeply. He had ignored the old man, and now his empire, his reputation, and even his sanity seemed threatened. In his deserted office, alone with the illuminated screens, he murmured, "I must understand, before it's too late." But he didn't yet know that this quest for understanding would lead him into territories that no power, no wealth, could ever dominate. The price of his arrogance had begun to be paid, and it was higher than he could have imagined. From the moment he first met the beggar and tasted the fatal fruit, Alexander Harper could no longer ignore what was happening to him. Every decision, every encounter, every document seemed to slip through his fingers, escaping all control. Fear and frustration intertwined, driving him to a single conclusion: he had to find that man and understand what he had tasted. He embarked on a personal investigation, temporarily setting aside meetings and contracts. The streets of Manhattan, which he knew so well, now seemed strangely foreign, as if the entire city were testing him. He questioned passers-by, searched alleyways, and revisited every corner where he had seen the beggar. But the beggar had vanished, leaving behind only a mystery and a warning. An unexpected lead presented itself in the form of a journal abandoned in a small neighborhood bookstore. The yellowed pages spoke of strange phenomena, of invisible forces that altered the perception of reality in those who had been touched by certain rare substances or experiences. Alexander felt a shiver run through him. The fruit he had tasted was not simply an exotic fruit, but a catalyst for a hidden truth, a forgotten experience that few had dared to approach. The further he went, the more disturbing the signs became. His employees were behaving erratically, his partners were looking at him suspiciously, and he was beginning to see unfamiliar faces that seemed to be watching him from a distance. Even his reflection in the mirrors in his office showed him images he didn't recognize. One night, as he was returning home, Alexander saw something that chilled him to the bone. The old man was there, sitting on a sidewalk, in the exact same spot where they had first met. His eyes, still as penetrating as ever, stared at him with an almost painful intensity. "You've come back," murmured the beggar, as if he had been waiting for this moment all his life. I have to understand," exclaimed Alexander, his voice trembling. "What's happening to me? What's in this fruit?" The beggar did not answer immediately. He took out a small notebook and handed it to Alexander. On the cover, one could read, "Truth cannot be tasted. It is lived, and it is paid for." Alexander felt his heart beat faster. Each page he turned revealed stories of powerful, wealthy, and influential people who had tasted this truth and whose lives had been changed forever, some beyond repair. The effects were unpredictable. Some grew wise, others descended into madness, and still others were destroyed by their own arrogance. The beggar placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "You chose to taste, without listening. Now you will have to follow the path to the end. To understand, yes, but at what price?" Alexander then understood that this was no longer a simple curiosity or an accidental experience. His life had just changed forever. Every future decision would be scrutinized, amplified, and every mistake would be fatal. He had to discover the truth, before it was too late. In the days that followed, Alexander Harper felt his world transform into a veritable nightmare. What he had initially perceived as mere disturbances became a series of uncontrollable events. Decisions he thought he had under control were slipping away from him, and every move he made seemed to trigger unexpected repercussions. It all started with his company. During a strategy meeting, Alexander proposed a project he considered safe and profitable. But the figures, despite being prepared by his best analysts, appeared to be wrong. The investors present, furious, questioned his competence and judgment. Alexander, usually charismatic and persuasive, felt powerless in the face of their skepticism. Then came the personal incidents. His loved ones, friends, and even his family seemed to be acting strangely. Arguments broke out over trivial matters, misunderstandings arose where none had ever existed before. His home, once a haven of peace, became a site of constant tension. Every glance, every word, every gesture was now fraught with consequences. That evening, alone in his study, Alexander felt a chill run through him. His reflection in the mirror showed him a tired man, marked by anguish and fear. The pages of the notebook left by the beggar turned by themselves, revealing enigmatic instructions. Understanding the truth requires sacrifice. Ignoring the signs leads to destruction. Alexander then realized that the fruit had not only altered his perceptions, but had opened a door to a dimension of truth that the human mind was not ready to control. Every action, every choice, every thought seemed amplified and transformed, with unforeseen consequences. Then, the first real warning came in the form of an accident. As he was leaving his office to go home, a car came speeding around the corner. Alexander barely had time to dodge. The impact slammed into the wall right behind him, a deafening crash that could have killed him. Trembling, he looked around him and saw, written in chalk on the sidewalk, "You're still not listening." He knew at that precise moment that his survival did not depend on his wealth, his power, or his skills. It depended on his ability to understand what he had tasted, to listen to the beggar, and to face the truth, whatever it might be. Alexander took a deep breath. His life had just plunged into uncontrollable chaos, but he knew that running away would be pointless. The only way out was to confront the mystery, and discover what the fruit had truly revealed to him. Night was falling on Manhattan when Alexander Harper returned to the spot where he had first met the beggar. The city's bustle seemed to fade around him, leaving an eerie, heavy silence. The streetlights cast shifting shadows, as if reality itself hesitated to reveal itself. The old man sat there, motionless, as if he had always known Alexander would return. Without a word, he held out the small, open notebook. On the page, carefully written words described what the fruit contained and why it was so dangerous. This fruit is a catalyst for truth. It reveals the reality of every decision, amplifies the consequences of every choice. Those who taste it unprepared see their lives transformed, sometimes for the better, often for the worse. Alexander felt his breath catch in his throat. Every incident, every disruption in his recent life, every accident, every misunderstanding, it all finally made sense. It wasn't the fruit itself that was dangerous, but the truth it revealed. And that truth wasn't suited to the ordinary human mind. So, all this chaos, everything I've been through, it's because of the fruit? Alexander asked, his voice trembling. The beggar nodded gravely. Yes. But this is only the beginning. The truth doesn't simply reveal itself. It tests, it pushes, it lays bare. If you want to survive what you've tasted, you'll have to understand the implications of every choice you've made, and will make. Alexander felt a mixture of fear and determination. For the first time in weeks, he understood that running away wasn't an option. The truth had chosen him, and he had to face it, no matter the cost. The old man continued, his voice low and firm. Many fail here. They see the truth, but they refuse to accept it. The fruit has opened your eyes, but now your eyes must learn to see what the world hides from you. Alexander nodded, knowing his life would never be the same again. The truth, whether he accepted it or not, would now guide every move, every decision, every thought. And he knew he couldn't afford to make a mistake. As he walked away, notebook in hand, he felt a strange energy coursing through his body, as if every fiber of his being was preparing for a journey no rich or powerful man had ever undertaken. The path to truth had only just begun. Since his encounter with the beggar and reading the notebook, Alexander Harper no longer lived in the real world as before. Every night, when he closed his eyes, visions seized him. These were not simple dreams. He relived his past decisions, amplified, observed in alternate realities where each choice had extreme consequences. One evening, as he stood before his mirror in his luxurious suite, the image of his reflection changed. He no longer saw the powerful and self-assured man, but a broken Alexander, ruined by pride and negligence. The faces of those he had hurt appeared behind him, betrayed colleagues, disappointed partners, lost friends, every mistake and every injustice reflected with unflinching clarity. No. I can change things, he murmured, breathless. But the vision gave him no respite. It intensified, forcing him to relive specific moments when his arrogance had hurt others. Every injustice he had ignored or minimized appeared to him in a dramatic form, a life destroyed, a career shattered, tears he had never seen. The beggar suddenly appeared in the vision, sitting on his usual sidewalk. His voice echoed in Alexander's mind. The truth doesn't forgive. To move forward, you must accept what you've done, and understand how your choices influence the world. Alexander felt an intense pain in his chest. Every choice ignored, every warning disregarded, was turning into a cruel lesson. He understood that the fruit had not only opened his eyes to the truth, but was exposing him to an emotional and moral experience that no rich or powerful man had ever faced. The following days were even more trying. Every decision in his daily life, signing a contract, replying to an email, interacting with an employee, triggered instant visions of the consequences. A single action could provoke a catastrophic reaction in an alternate reality. Alexander now had to consider every move as if he held the fate of thousands of lives in his hands. For the first time, he understood that absolute power was worthless in the face of truth. His wealth, influence, and fame were powerless against the lesson the fruit taught him: ignoring the truth has a price, and he now had to face it fully in order to survive. As he collapsed onto his desk, exhausted by these visions, Alexander made a silent promise to himself. I will understand. I will master this truth, or it will destroy me. After weeks of visions, disturbances, and confrontations with the truth, Alexander Harper began to understand one essential thing: he could no longer act as before. Every decision had to be considered, every action measured. The fruit had given him a dangerous gift, but also a chance to right some wrongs. He began with his employees. Every interaction was now meticulously planned, anticipating the consequences. Alexander took the time to listen, to understand everyone's needs, and to correct the injustices he had overlooked. He signed contracts cautiously and replaced some risky strategies with fairer, more realistic plans. Gradually, results began to appear. Tensions within his company eased, investors regained confidence, and some employees, once disillusioned, began to look at him with respect. But the beggar had warned him, not all the consequences could be undone. One evening, while rereading his notebook, a page caught his attention. Some truths cannot be changed. The past is the past. What you ignored, what you hurt, some wounds are irreversible. Learn to live with them. Alexander felt a pang in his heart. Decisions he had made years before, decisions he had ignored or mishandled, continued to haunt him. Ruined partners, broken friendships, lives affected by his arrogance, he couldn't fix them, no matter how hard he tried. But he didn't stop. He realized that the fruit hadn't just shown him the truth to punish him, but to teach him responsibility and humility. Every small action he took now, every thoughtful gesture, helped restore a fragile balance. As he walked through the streets of Manhattan, notebook clutched to his chest, he saw the beggar again. This time, the man didn't speak. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement. Alexander understood that the real challenge wasn't to undo the past, but to live fully in truth, accepting both his limitations and his power to act for the better. And for the first time since the fatal taste of the fruit, Alexander Harper felt a kind of peace. He knew that the truth would always remain a challenge, a merciless mirror to his choices, but he was ready to move on. He had learned that wealth and power were powerless against the truth, but that conscience and humility could transform pain into strength. Weeks and months passed, but Alexander Harper never truly regained the comfort of his former life. The truth, revealed by the fruit and guided by the beggar, was now a constant companion, both guide and silent judge. Every daily decision was imbued with this newfound awareness, this clarity that no power or wealth could replace. One morning, Alexander went to the place where it had all begun, the street corner where he had first met the old man. The beggar was there, sitting on his cardboard box, as if time had not touched him. The man's gaze, grave and profound, pierced Alexander, imparting a final, silent lesson. "You have tasted the truth and survived," the beggar murmured. "But surviving is not enough. Understanding and accepting, that is your ultimate challenge." Alexander felt his heart sink. He thought of everything he had lost, the illusions of control, the blind pride, the broken relationships. But he also thought of what he had gained, clarity of vision, the ability to act consciously, and a humility he had never known. The old man extended his hand, and Alexander understood that this gesture was not a simple greeting, but a symbolic transfer. The power of truth could not be bought, it had to be experienced. "Every future choice you make will now be enlightened," said the beggar. "But remember, truth can never be dominated. It is a guide, not a tool." Alexander nodded, a mixture of gratitude and respect in his eyes. For the first time, he felt truly free, not from his empire, not from his wealth, but from the illusions that had once blinded him. As he walked away, the beggar remained silent, gradually disappearing into the Manhattan crowd, like a shadow that had accomplished its mission. Alexander, however, knew his life would never be the same. He was no longer the arrogant billionaire who ignored warnings. He was a man who had tasted the truth, confronted it, and survived to transform his world and his choices. Looking at the bustling streets around him, Alexander Harper smiled, for the first time without arrogance, but with a newfound awareness. Every step he took from now on would be guided by what he had learned, that power is nothing without truth, and that true wealth lies in understanding and responsibility. And so, the beggar's lesson was forever engraved in his mind. Ignoring the truth can be costly, but accepting it, even with its pains, opens the way to an authentic life.